tell you, my life right now is just amazing. I cannot help but start with last Sunday. How was that for all of you? And the attitude of gratitude to continue to savor that opportunity to all come together. It's wonderful. And can I ask those of you one more time, because I just cannot be grateful enough, if you had anything to do to serve or plan or coordinate that service, would you please stand? Thank you. Thank you. I love when community comes together to create the opportunity to be in that loving space together, right? Yes. Meanwhile, I was with my mother-in-law this last weekend. My father-in-law transitioned about 6 weeks ago, and we'll be doing his celebration of life in about 2 weeks. So spending time with her in the grieving process, she was very grateful. So just the opportunity to recreate relationship. And then I got to pick up both my kids from the airport, one coming from Portland and one coming from the LA area, late Friday night. And last night we celebrated my youngest niece's wedding. And I forgot to say, my son and daughter each brought their boyfriend and girlfriend, who, based on how they're speaking, might be their life partners. And so just dancing in the joy of all of us together celebrating love. I mean, my heart keeps filling. I keep saying life is so delicious right now. Truly, gratitude is the attitude of a blessed life. Yes. So I hope that for those of you who may not be in that space right now, that we can remind you of this space, that yes, healing happens, and we have the opportunity to be in this, move to this space of gratitude and love. So our monthly theme for October is Awakening by Releasing and Forgiving. You remember what my lesson title is? Why do we hold on? Surrender! Well, there's a lot of different ways I could say that. Surrender. The power of how we say that matters. But I want to begin by contemplating trust. So if you will, for a moment, I want you to think about someone you trust deeply. What does the relationship feel like when you can trust someone deeply? Intimate, safe, authentic, richness, freedom. There's an ease with that freedom to be yourself, yes? Love, warm, joyous, acceptance, no expectation. And so then when you're with this person that you trust, if things start to go wrong, then what? How does it feel? Does it still feel safe? Well, if things start to go wrong in life and they are with you in it and you trust them, describe how that feels. An opportunity. Stability. So when you have faith because you trust this person that you're going to get beyond, yes? Yes, completeness and a clarity. I mean, even though what may be happening isn't clear, that faith and that willingness to step out with that person, how does that feel? And conjure this up in your living space in the moment. And if you were given a job to do with someone you trust, how does that feel? Easy, fun, creative, right? So Outcome guaranteed because you trust you're going to get it done. So is that how you trust Spirit in your life when things go wrong? Little giggle here and there. Now I'm going to ask you, for the sake of getting clear yourself, contrast that with someone you don't trust. So bring someone to mind for whatever reason that you don't trust. It's not about them. It's about you trusting them. What does that relationship feel like? Cold, scary, so fear, uncomfortable, avoidable, frustrating, distant, toxic. Yeah. Sad. So what happens then when things start to go wrong with them? It's probably fight or flight, right? Yes. Little different than when you're with somebody you trust. And then when you're asked to do a job with somebody you don't trust, what does that feel like? Exhausting. Do you feel the contrast? So in the essence of that relationship with somebody you trust, there is as somebody said, the opportunity to have fun and create. But then when we repicture that with somebody we don't trust, then there's a lot of doubt. There's not so much clarity. Again, the fight or flight feeling, not so fun or creative, is it? So I'm going to continue to ask you. Of course, it's not black and white. We know there's a gray. When things start to happen in your life that aren't quite going the right way or the way you expected, are you in that fight or flight? Do you distrust life? Or are you in the, all right, as we were talking about with the last book of the month, No Mud, No Lotus, I'm in the mud. I have become aware of the mud. And I know without mud, there's no lotus. Sort of reminds me of the story of, being in a room of manure and the little girl saying, there's a pony in here somewhere. True optimism. It's important to think about that, because wherever you are with Spirit in your life, your higher power, universal source, whatever you want to call your higher power, when you're starting to doubt, when things go not the way you expected, are you in the fight or flight and the not so clear and the not so fun? Or can you move yourself back to faith, back to the trust that I'm going to be okay? I am going to be okay. Because I know that the divine source is with me and for me. That's right. The lotus is going to show up. It's going to blossom. I'll share a little of my own experience a little bit later with that. Now, there's a cartoon that has a picture of a man with a really big bag on his back, bigger than Santa Claus bag. And you know what that bag is labeled? The past. Now, I had somebody after, 3 of the lessons last month being on No Mud, No Lotus was like, well, we're metaphysicians, so we don't hang around in that mud a whole lot. But I want to be very clear here. We don't stick our heads in the ground. We don't ever not look in the mirror. We don't want to make drama out of it. And we don't want to stay there a long time, but the power becomes first in the awareness of where our false belief is. And we may suffer. So yes, sometimes we have to be in the suffering, and it's not just a touchdown and take off again. So the book we have this month, A World Without Fear, has a process. to move us through our fear or any of the other stuff we may be going through. But I want you to imagine that the things in your past which you have not been able to forgive or surrender to is the pack on your back. And if you can heal the things that are the pack on your back, your load will be lighter. And as you come into alignment with spiritual principle, then your life does become more of a space of fun, creativity, clarity, because as you get lined up, there's no fuzziness there. So then bringing yourself back with your spiritual principle in alignment with those things that are a part of your past that you carry around. It can be healed. That's the first thing that you have to believe in. Because there's a part of you that's never been hurt or disappointed by anybody. At the core of your being is the love and the spirit and the truth of beingness. And you can always return there. It never is scarred. It's a place of pure, wholesome wholeness. And so it's about circling back to remembering the truth of who you are. So we may be holding regrets, blame, guilt, resentment, judgment about how we were treated, and fear. And without doing spiritual practice, those things become like garbage at the bottom of a garbage can. Ew. Why is that? Because thoughts are things. We may not see them, but thoughts are things. And what tends to happen is, using some examples, maybe when you were younger, a teacher or a parent or somebody said, "You're not good enough." Now, as a child, people who are older than us tended to have more authority, more power, and so we tended not to necessarily be able to protect ourselves from the arrow that was thrown at us. Now, I work in higher education, and at one point my dad did start talking to me about higher education. I said, "Wait, I've been in higher education for 30 years. Can I tell you?" But of course, I'm always the daughter. The point being that when you were younger and somebody gave you a seed, or threw you an arrow, you probably picked up the arrow and took it in. So now it's a part of your subconscious, and so we start building on that with our thoughts. And as we build on that, then it may show up in our lives that we didn't go for the job that we could have gone for, that maybe we don't believe in our dream anymore. Maybe we think that, I'll survive with the income I have now. There are a lot of things that will undermine the potential and possibilities. And we start creating beliefs that are complicated with different tops that sit on top of the "I am not good enough." And this is why it's important, again, for spiritual practice. And like no mud, no lotus, make sure that we're contemplating and finding out what's below some of the things that we see happening in our life. What are the effects? And if we will contemplate and be willing to really become aware of our false beliefs, then sometimes, once you can reaffirm that it's not true, once you take the foundation apart, other things fall away and the truth now surfaces because it's not covered up by all those false beliefs. Dr. Ernest Holmes wrote, What a load is dropped from the shoulders of personal responsibility when we realize that the eternal mind, that's with a capital M, that's at the base of your beingness, eternal mind holds not against anyone. Are you still holding against someone? Because that's not your true nature. And I always have to ask myself, why am I holding on to that? Because the other person, the thoughts are things right here with me. I am holding myself back. I am starting to build something on top of that. That is not the truth of my being. So what is it in that mud do I need to learn and then reaffirm for myself what I know is true of me? And then the lotus shall arrive. Ernest Holmes also says, the mind which condemns understands not the truth of being, and the heart of which would shut the door of its bosom to one who is mistaken, they strangle life. They close their eyes to a greater vision. Holding on to those thoughts against another, or quite frankly, against yourself, especially when it comes to regret, is holding you down, or again, thinking about that pack on your back, holding you back. So you have to ask yourself, why am I hanging on? And then you have to sit with that. And then when you sit with that, you have to have faith and trust so that you can recreate. You can see where the healing can happen. You can see where your false belief is at. And for some of us, that doesn't just come like that. So when the individual asked, well, don't in Science of Mind with the no lotus, no mud, no lotus, we don't really, spend time in that suffering. I'm like, well, depending on how deep you got in your awareness, are you willing to sit with it and be uncomfortable enough that you know you can get to the truth and discover what those false beliefs are, so then you can reaffirm the truth of your being. So I like to look at it like this. Imagine a water skier. How many have ever water skied in here? Okay, and those that haven't, I'm sure you've seen pictures, right? And when life is good, you're hanging on to that rope, and you're just skimming across the top, enjoying your fun ride. Then all of a sudden there's a bump, you fall. What happens to the person who hangs on? That's what I like to use for when you're hanging on. And what happens when you let go and surrender? You float. Life supports you. So I want you to keep that in mind when you're asking, what am I hanging on for? Oh my gosh. Yes, surrender. And again, that takes a spiritual practice. Being patient, being willing, being open, and asking yourself questions. And let me tell you, this book really, the last half of the book are all the bullet points about the things that we fear. And a lot of our surrender, even if it's that I don't want to forgive somebody based on how they violated me, there's usually a fear that's below that. So this book is a spiritual practice. And I do want to say that there is a part of this book that actually talks about, many of the statements are, for instance, let me grab one. I might have even had one here. Okay, I'm going to tell a personal story, then I'll come back to what I discovered my fear. So, for those of you that don't know me very well, I've worked at Chico State for 25 years, and now I work for the parent organization, the Chancellor's Office. And I have some very good colleagues. We all work remotely. We use computers to frequently stay in touch with each other and have meetings several times a week. And at one point, I'm having a conversation with one of my colleagues. And you need to know that my boss knows that I'm usually quite candid. He will tell stories about, I always know where Kathy is. She lets me know. I don't ever have to second guess. I don't have to play games trying to figure out where she stands. She'll just let you know. So he sees me as being quite candid. But as I'm talking to one of my colleagues, I said, well, of course, if I'm candid, I expect people to be candid with me. And then he says to me, well, you know, Kathy, you really haven't let go of the program. The Chancellor's Office let go of the program that I was overseeing. You really haven't let go of that. I'm like, I haven't? My opportunity to practice. Now, I could have said, thank you, close the door, and walk away, right? But instead, I get curious. Tell me more about how you see that. And so he told me some of the things that I've said and some of the things that I've done. And I was like, okay, thank you. And then I had to go for a walk. And I had to take the time to contemplate, okay, wow, here's what I realized. The program ended in June. And my boss's boss doesn't really know anything about how the program was doing. And faculty really enjoyed the program. But as leadership changes and the way it happens, the boss's boss doesn't see value in that and chose to spend the money someplace else. And then I, again, had to do my spiritual practice. So can I be candid? Of course I want to be. I hope so. That's what creates relationship, right? Trust. I realized that I had a fear that they would no longer find value in the other things that I do if they were so free to let that go. But I wasn't aware of that. Now, some of you might remember quite a while ago, I did a lesson on this book called Transitions. Highly recommend this book, Making Sense of Life's Changes. This book actually sits with my estate planning. And it's actually in my estate instructions that my kids read this book before they get anything. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's that this book talks about, we always think there's new beginnings. The truth is there is endings, and then we should take a pause and then begin again. And that's what I realized, the aha, that I needed to do based on my job. That I needed to realize, oh, that had ended. I was sort of in this zone of not really having started something else yet, and realizing that I needed that time to also, you know, like I just mentioned in the beginning, savor what was, give gratitude, really be able to take from the goodness of all that had come before. And then allow myself to be with that. And as I continue to do that, then it's like, you know what? I see myself now ready to create again with a whole new sense of clarity. Because I don't have this stuff that was underneath and subconscious to making the turn. So, in the book, A World Without Fear, it was, all right, I need to work with the fear of, fear that people aren't going to value my work. Now, in this book, I have to forewarn those of you who've done Science of Mind for a while, that he has you do the I am my fear of not feeling valued. Don't run from that. Because when you, what I have realized, and he continues to say, don't change what I'm asking you to do, because the minute you change it, now you're not doing the process. And he's done the process with lots of people. He's led lots. And what I realized is that when I called out that fear that way, I am my fear of not being valued. It became separate from me, and it was easier for me to stand in my truth and say, that's where the falseness stands. And then able to come back and say, I am valued. In other words, practitioners may say, well, we don't want to say, I am my fear, because that's just affirming something that we don't want to give power to. But I'm also going to say that by doing the process that he asked you to go through, it does allow for that, I know my truth, and I see where my false thinking is. And then I'm allowed to come back and create the I am valued. So that's why you have to sit in the mud sometimes, so that you can see it clearly. You can realign with spiritual principle, and that opens up new possibilities. So, page 99, it is good to let go of the past, and necessary if you want to live in the present and find your peace. So surrender and trust that life will support you. And I will add, you are loved and you are the beloved. Namaste. Music by